Why you self-sabotage? The Jungian truth to breaking free. Why do we sabotage our own success? Why do we repeat the same self-destructive patterns, even when we consciously want to change? According to Carl Jung, the answer lies deep in the unconscious mind. The shadow self, those hidden parts of us that we suppress, often takes control when we least expect it. But here's the good news. Understanding these hidden forces is the first step to breaking free. In this video, we'll explore the Jungian truth behind self-sabotage and, more importantly, how you can reclaim your power. If you've ever felt like your worst enemy is yourself, stay with me until the end. You're about to gain life-changing insight. And before we dive in, don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you want more content that uncovers the hidden truths of the mind. Topic 1. The shadow self, the hidden force behind self-sabotage. Carl Jung described the shadow self as the unconscious part of our psyche that holds the traits, emotions, and desires we reject or suppress. These hidden aspects don't disappear. Instead, they manifest in ways we often don't recognize, like self-sabotage. When you repeatedly undermine your own goals, it's likely that your shadow is at play, pulling the strings from beneath your conscious awareness. The shadow forms early in life, shaped by societal conditioning, family expectations, and personal experiences. As children, we learn which traits are acceptable and which must be hidden. If we were told that anger is bad, we suppress it. If vulnerability was mocked, we bury it. Over time, these rejected aspects form a hidden identity, lurking beneath the surface, influencing our actions in ways we don't consciously understand. Self-sabotage happens when the shadow finds a way to express itself. If you've ever procrastinated on an important goal, ruined a promising relationship, or held yourself back from success, your shadow might be interfering. It's not doing this to harm you. It's simply seeking expression in whatever way it can, even if it means disrupting your conscious desires. A classic example is fear of failure. Many people sabotage themselves because deep down, their shadow holds memories of rejection or humiliation. If someone grew up in an environment where failure was harshly criticized, their unconscious mind might sabotage new opportunities to avoid the risk of reliving that pain. It's a defense mechanism, even if it appears destructive. But it doesn't stop there. Some people experience fear of success, a strange paradox where achieving their goals triggers an unconscious resistance. Why? Because their shadow might associate success with pressure, responsibility, or even betrayal. If, for example, someone grew up in a household where successful people were seen as arrogant or selfish, their shadow might sabotage their progress to maintain a hidden loyalty to their upbringing. One of the most dangerous aspects of the shadow is its ability to project itself onto others. Instead of recognizing our hidden fears and weaknesses, we see them reflected in those around us. If you strongly dislike someone for being arrogant, manipulative, or weak, there's a chance that these are qualities within your own shadow that you refuse to acknowledge. This projection can make self-sabotage even worse because it blinds us to the real source of our struggles. Jung believed that what we resist persists. The more we deny our shadow, the stronger its influence becomes. This explains why people often repeat the same mistakes. A pattern of failed relationships, ruined opportunities, or self-destructive behaviors. Until the shadow is brought into awareness, it continues to control us from the depths of the unconscious. Bringing the shadow to light requires radical self-honesty. It means recognizing uncomfortable truths about ourselves and accepting them without judgment. This process is known as shadow work, a deep psychological practice that allows us to reclaim the parts of ourselves we've ignored or rejected. One powerful way to uncover your shadow is to observe your emotional triggers. What qualities in others make you irrationally angry? What behaviors do you judge most harshly? Often, the things we react to the most in others are the very things we repress within ourselves. By identifying these patterns, you can start to understand what your shadow is trying to reveal. Another technique is journaling. Writing about your fears, mistakes, and patterns of self-sabotage can expose hidden aspects of your psyche. Ask yourself questions like, what am I afraid people will find out about me? When do I feel most out of control? What parts of myself do I try to hide? The answers might surprise you. Self-awareness is the first step to breaking free from self-sabotage, but integration is the key to lasting change. Shadow integration isn't about eliminating your dark side, it's about making peace with it. By acknowledging and embracing the shadow, you remove its power to control you from the background. A great way to practice integration is through inner dialogue. Instead of shaming yourself for self-sabotaging behaviors, ask, what is my shadow trying to tell me? What need am I suppressing? Treat your shadow not as an enemy, but as a wounded part of you that's seeking understanding. Meditation and visualization can also help. Imagine meeting your shadow in a safe space, having a conversation with it, and listening to what it has to say. Often, our shadow just wants to be heard, not ignored. The more we engage with it consciously, the less it will act out through sabotage. In many ways, self-sabotage is a sign that your shadow is desperate for integration. When you continually get in your own way, it's not because you're weak or incapable, it's because an unconscious part of you is begging for attention. Instead of fighting it, try to understand it. Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is why self-sabotage can feel like destiny, as if no matter what you do, you end up repeating the same patterns. But once you illuminate the shadow, you regain control. Your self-sabotage isn't a curse, it's a call for self-exploration. The more you face your inner darkness, the more you unlock your hidden strengths. You are not broken, and your shadow is not your enemy. It's simply the part of you that needs the most understanding. By embracing your full self, the light and the dark, you step into true personal power. And once you do that, self-sabotage loses its grip on you forever. Topic 2. Self-sabotage as a battle between the ego and the unconscious. At the heart of self-sabotage lies an internal conflict, the struggle between the ego and the unconscious mind. While the ego represents our conscious identity, our goals, desires, and self-image, the unconscious holds our deepest fears, wounds, and suppressed emotions. The problem? The unconscious is often more powerful than the ego, influencing our actions in ways we don't realize. Carl Jung described the ego as the part of the psyche that organizes our conscious experience. It allows us to have a sense of self, to function in society, and to set personal goals. However, the ego is also limited. It only sees what we consciously acknowledge. The unconscious, on the other hand, operates beneath awareness, storing past traumas, forgotten memories, and unresolved conflicts. And when these hidden elements are not integrated, they begin to shape our behaviors in destructive ways. Self-sabotage happens when these two forces, ego and unconscious, are in opposition. The ego may want success, love, or happiness, but if the unconscious holds deep-seated fears about these things, it will create obstacles. This is why people often find themselves torn between what they consciously desire and what they subconsciously resist. For example, someone might consciously want to be in a loving relationship, yet repeatedly push partners away. Why? Because their unconscious might associate love with abandonment, betrayal, or pain, especially if they experienced emotional wounds in childhood. Even though their ego longs for connection, the unconscious sabotages it to avoid potential suffering. Another example is career success. A person might have big aspirations but constantly procrastinate, miss deadlines, or make reckless decisions that prevent them from advancing. On the surface, it seems like laziness or bad luck. But deep down, their unconscious might be afraid of visibility, responsibility, or failure. If their past experiences taught them that success leads to pressure or judgment, their psyche will resist it at all costs. This internal war between the ego and the unconscious creates cognitive dissonance, a state of psychological tension where our actions contradict our conscious goals. The more we ignore this inner conflict, the stronger the sabotage becomes. It's as if our own mind is working against us, preventing us from moving forward. One of the most frustrating aspects of self-sabotage is that it often disguises itself as rationality. The unconscious doesn't say, "I'm afraid of success, so I'll ruin this opportunity." Instead, it feeds the ego convincing excuses. "I'm not ready yet. This isn't the right time. I don't have what it takes." These thoughts feel logical, but they are actually defense mechanisms designed to keep us safe from perceived threat. Jungian psychology teaches that the only way to resolve this battle is to bring the unconscious into awareness. This means identifying the fears, wounds, and limiting beliefs that are secretly influencing our actions. The more we explore our hidden patterns, the more we regain control. A powerful technique for uncovering unconscious resistance is self-inquiry. Ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I succeed? What hidden benefit do I get from sabotaging myself? What past experiences might be shaping my fears about love, success, or happiness? These questions might reveal uncomfortable truths, but they also expose the root of self-sabotage. Once you understand why you resist certain things, you can begin to change the pattern. Another effective approach is inner dialogue. Since self-sabotage is a battle between different parts of the psyche, treating it as a conversation can be transformative. Try speaking to your unconscious as if it were a separate entity. You might say, "I see that you're afraid of success. I understand why. But I want to reassure you that we are safe now." By acknowledging the fears rather than ignoring them, you begin to dissolve their power. One of the biggest breakthroughs in Jungian psychology is the understanding that the unconscious is not the enemy. It doesn't sabotage us out of malice, it does so out of protection. The unconscious clings to old beliefs because it thinks they are keeping us safe from past pain. But what once protected us in childhood often limits us in adulthood. For example, if someone was criticized harshly as a child, their unconscious might develop a belief that staying invisible is safer than being seen. This belief served a purpose in childhood, preventing them from experiencing rejection. But as an adult, it manifests as self-sabotage, staying small, avoiding risks, and rejecting opportunities for growth. The key to breaking free is recognizing that these old defenses are no longer necessary. Meditation and mindfulness can help bridge the gap between the ego and the unconscious. By sitting in stillness and observing your thoughts without judgment, you can start to notice the deeper fears driving your behaviors. Visualization exercises can also be useful. Imagine your ego and your unconscious as two figures in a room. What would they say to each other? What needs to be healed? Many people assume they need to fight self-sabotage, but the truth is healing comes from integration, not resistance. Instead of trying to overpower your unconscious, work with it. Listen to its fears, understand its motives, and gently guide it toward a new perspective. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This means that true transformation happens when we confront the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. The more we bring our unconscious fears into the light, the less they control us. Self-sabotage is not a life sentence. It's a signal, a message from the deepest parts of your mind, asking for attention and healing. Once you learn to listen to this message, you reclaim your power. You become the conscious architect of your life, rather than a victim of unconscious patterns. In the end, the battle between the ego and the unconscious isn't about winning, it's about understanding. And once you truly understand yourself, self-sabotage begins to lose its grip. Topic 3. Repetition compulsion: why we relive the same patterns. One of the most frustrating aspects of self-sabotage is the feeling of being stuck in a loop, making the same mistakes, choosing the same toxic relationships, or repeating behaviors that lead to failure. Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud both explored a concept called repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate past wounds in the present. This phenomenon explains why we often relive the same painful experiences, even when we desperately want change. Repetition compulsion isn't just bad luck. It's a deeply rooted psychological mechanism. The unconscious mind, in an attempt to process unresolved trauma, compels us to recreate similar situations in the hope that this time, we will resolve them. The problem? Unless we become aware of this pattern, we simply repeat the pain rather than heal it. Imagine someone who had an emotionally distant parent growing up. As an adult, they may find themselves repeatedly drawn to unavailable or indifferent partners. Consciously, they crave love and connection, but their unconscious is trying to fix the past by recreating the same conditions, hoping that, this time, they will finally receive the love they were denied in childhood. Another example is self-sabotage in careers. If someone grew up with feelings of unworthiness, they might unconsciously choose jobs that undervalue them or work for bosses who reinforce their low self-esteem. It's not that they enjoy suffering, it's that their unconscious is following a script it learned long ago. Repetition compulsion is like a broken record playing in our mind. The characters may change, but the story stays the same. If we don't confront it, we remain trapped in cycles of pain, repeating the same mistakes under different circumstances. Jung believed that unresolved trauma demands expression. If we don't consciously process it, it will manifest in our actions, relationships, and decisions. This is why some people keep ending up in toxic relationships or making poor financial choices. These patterns are not coincidences, they are clues. They point directly to what needs healing. Breaking free from repetition compulsion requires deep self-awareness. The first step is recognizing your recurring patterns. Ask yourself, what situations in my life seem to repeat? Do I tend to attract the same type of people? Are there self-destructive habits I keep falling into? Once you identify the cycle, the next step is to trace it back to its origin. Almost always, these patterns started in childhood. What was the first time in your life that you felt this way? Who in your early years treated you in a similar manner? The past holds the answers to why you keep reliving these experiences. A powerful way to break the cycle is through inner child work. Since most self-sabotaging patterns originate from childhood wounds, reconnecting with your inner child, the part of you that first experienced this pain, can be deeply healing. You can do this by writing a letter to your younger self, visualizing a conversation with them, or even comforting them in meditation. The goal is to give your past self the love and reassurance they never received. Another method is pattern disruption. The next time you find yourself repeating an old pattern, pause and ask, what would happen if I did the opposite? If you always chase after emotionally unavailable partners, try setting boundaries. If you tend to sabotage success, push yourself to see things through. These small disruptions send a signal to your unconscious that the cycle is no longer necessary. Jung emphasized the importance of conscious choice in breaking free from unconscious patterns. Every time you make a new decision, one that is different from the past, you weaken the old cycle. The more you challenge the automatic behaviors that lead to self-sabotage, the more control you regain over your life. Healing isn't about forcing change overnight, it's about gradually rewiring your mind. Repetition compulsion exists because the unconscious believes that reliving old pain will somehow resolve it. But the truth is, true healing only happens when we choose something different. One of Jung's most famous quotes applies perfectly here. I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. You are not doomed to repeat the past. You have the power to rewrite your story. The first step is awareness. The second is action. And once you break free from the cycle, you will discover a level of freedom and self-mastery you never thought possible. Topic 4. The inner critic, when your mind becomes your worst enemy. Deep within the human psyche exists a voice, one that whispers doubt, shame, and fear. This voice is known as the inner critic, and for many, it is the driving force behind self-sabotage. Jungian psychology teaches that this critical voice is not inherent but rather a collection of external judgments we have internalized throughout our lives. The good news? It can be transformed. The inner critic is formed in childhood. When we were young, we absorbed the expectations, criticisms, and fears of parents, teachers, and society. If we were told that we were not good enough, too much, or that we needed to work harder to be worthy of love, these messages became ingrained. Over time, they evolved into a harsh inner voice that constantly judges, belittles, and holds us back. At its core, the inner critic is a survival mechanism. It believes that by criticizing us, it is keeping us safe from rejection or failure. If it convinces us that we are not ready, we won't take risks. If it tells us that we are not lovable, we won't get close enough to be hurt. The problem? Instead of protecting us, it often paralyzes us, keeping us stuck in cycles of self-sabotage. The inner critic is responsible for procrastination. It convinces us that our work won't be good enough, so we avoid starting. Perfectionism, it tells us that anything less than perfect is failure, making us afraid to finish things. Fear of success, it makes us believe that if we succeed, we'll be judged, envied, or unable to handle the pressure. Negative self-talk, it constantly reminds us of our past mistakes and weaknesses, reinforcing a low self-image. Many people believe that their inner critic is telling the truth, but Jungian psychology reveals that it is simply a learned voice, a distorted reflection of external judgments. If you had grown up in a different environment, with unconditional support and encouragement, your inner critic would be much quieter, if not non-existent. The key to overcoming the inner critic is awareness. Pay attention to how you speak to yourself. Would you talk to a friend the way you talk to yourself? Probably not. The inner critic thrives on unconscious repetition. By making it conscious, you weaken its power. One effective way to deal with the inner critic is to personify it. Instead of seeing it as your own thoughts, imagine it as an external character. Maybe it's an overprotective but misguided guardian, a harsh teacher, or even a scared child trying to control things. By separating it from your true self, you begin to see that you are not your inner critic. You are the observer of it. Another technique is inner dialogue. When the inner critic attacks, don't just accept its words. Challenge it. Ask, is this really true, or is this an old belief? Would I say this to someone I love? What is the worst that could happen if I ignore this voice and take action anyway? This shifts the power dynamic. Instead of the inner critic controlling you, you take control of the conversation. Jung believed that true self-growth comes from integrating all parts of ourselves, including the inner critic. Instead of trying to silence it completely, try to reframe its role. Instead of being your enemy, your inner critic can become your inner coach, one that encourages you with constructive feedback rather than harsh judgment. A great exercise for this is journaling the inner critic's words. Write down your self-critical thoughts as if someone else were saying them to you. Then, rewrite them as if a wise, supportive mentor were responding. Over time, this retrains your mind to respond with compassion rather than judgment. Mindfulness and meditation also help in quieting the inner critic. When you observe your thoughts without attaching emotion to them, you begin to see them for what they are, just thoughts, not absolute truths. This detachment reduces their emotional impact, allowing you to act despite self-doubt. Carl Jung famously said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." The inner critic keeps you looking outward, fearing judgment, seeking approval, avoiding failure. But once you turn inward and confront it, you awaken to a deeper truth. You are not your fears, doubts, or past mistakes. You are the one who chooses what voice to listen to. Self-sabotage loses its grip when the inner critic is no longer the loudest voice in your mind. By recognizing its origins, challenging its distortions and reshaping its role, you free yourself from its control. You step into a new reality, one where your inner voice is your greatest ally, not your greatest enemy. Topic 5. Breaking Free: How to Integrate the Shadow and Stop Self-Sabotaging. Self-sabotage is not just a behavioral issue, it is a deep psychological pattern rooted in the unconscious mind. As we've explored, the shadow, the inner critic, and repetition compulsion all work together to keep us trapped in cycles of fear, doubt, and avoidance. But here's the truth: you are not doomed to repeat these patterns forever. Jungian psychology provides a clear path to liberation through shadow integration. Carl Jung believed that true transformation happens not by eliminating the shadow, but by integrating it. The shadow is not evil, nor is it something to be destroyed. Instead, it holds your suppressed strengths, desires, and power. The key to breaking free from self-sabotage is to stop fighting your inner darkness and instead bring it into conscious awareness. The first step is radical self-honesty. You must be willing to look at the parts of yourself that you have denied, rejected, or avoided. This means confronting your fears, patterns, and triggers. Ask yourself, in what ways do I sabotage myself? What emotions or desires am I afraid to acknowledge? What benefits do I secretly gain from my self-sabotaging behaviors? For many people, self-sabotage serves an unconscious purpose. It may keep them in a comfortable but stagnant situation. It may allow them to avoid responsibility. It may even act as a form of self-punishment due to deep-seated guilt or shame. Once you uncover these hidden motivations, you can begin to dismantle them. One of the most effective tools for shadow integration is journaling. Writing down your self-sabotaging thoughts and behaviors brings them into the light. Instead of letting them control you from the unconscious, you make them visible. This alone begins to weaken their hold. Another powerful method is active imagination, a Jungian practice that involves having a dialogue with your shadow. Imagine your self-sabotaging side as a separate entity. What would it say if you asked it why it keeps interfering? What does it need from you? When you engage with your shadow in this way, you begin to understand its purpose, and once you understand it, you can redirect its energy in a healthier way. Meditation and visualization can also help. One effective technique is the shadow embrace exercise. Close your eyes and visualize your shadow standing before you. Instead of fearing or rejecting it, step forward and embrace it. Whisper to it, "I see you. I accept you. You are part of me." Feel its energy merging with yours, not as an enemy, but as an integrated part of your being. This practice reprograms your unconscious mind. The more you accept your shadow, the less it needs to act out through self-sabotage. Self-awareness alone, however, is not enough. You must also take deliberate action. Every time you catch yourself engaging in self-sabotage, pause and ask, what fear is driving this behavior? What would happen if I acted differently this time? Then, do the opposite of what your old pattern tells you to do. If your self-sabotage is procrastination, take the first small step. If it is avoiding intimacy, lean into vulnerability. If it is perfectionism, allow yourself to create something imperfect. These small, intentional actions rewire your brain, weakening the old patterns and creating new neural pathways. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is why many people feel like their life is out of their control, because their unconscious mind is running the show. But once you bring awareness to your patterns and take deliberate action, you reclaim your power. Breaking free from self-sabotage doesn't mean you will never struggle again. It means that when self-sabotage arises, you will recognize it for what it is, an old defense mechanism, not an absolute truth. You will have the tools to confront it, to challenge it, and to choose a different path. True transformation happens when you embrace your whole self, the light and the dark, the strengths and the fears. The goal is not perfection, but wholeness. And when you integrate all parts of yourself, self-sabotage loses its grip. You step into a new reality, one where you are not controlled by unconscious fears, but guided by conscious choice. Self-sabotage is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that your unconscious mind is trying to communicate with you. As we've explored, Carl Jung's work reveals that our shadow self, inner critic, and unconscious fears often hold us back, not out of malice, but out of an outdated attempt to protect us. But here's the truth. You are not a prisoner of your past patterns. Once you begin to recognize the hidden forces at play, you gain the power to break free. Through self-awareness, shadow work, and conscious action, you can transform self-sabotage from an obstacle into an opportunity for growth, healing, and self-mastery. Now, I want to hear from you. Which part of this video resonated with you the most? Have you noticed self-sabotaging patterns in your own life? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if this video helped you, don't forget to like the video to help spread this message. Subscribe for more deep insights into psychology and self-discovery. Share this with someone who might need to hear it today. Your journey to self-awareness is just beginning. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and remember, you have the power to rewrite your story.